You're teaching a critical skill, but ask yourself, is your learner actually fluent, or are they just, waiting for your cue?
Right, waiting for that SD.
Exactly. If they can't perform without you delivering an SD, you haven't built independence, you've built reliance. Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is clinically precise and, honestly, heavily exam-focused. We are mastering BACB task list item G.13, designing and evaluating trial-based and free-operant procedures.
Which really is, it's the ultimate test of a clinician's programming.
Oh, 100%.
Knowing exactly when to construct the environment tightly around the learner to, build a repertoire, and when you absolutely must step back and just let the behavior flow to build true independence.
And we are setting the tone right now. No fluff. We are breaking down the clinical use, the exam logic, and the advanced applications of these procedures. By the end of this deep dive, you will be equipped to operate and to test like a top 1% BCBA coach.
Yeah, you need to define these procedures with absolute clinical precision, but without sounding like a textbook.
Right, we don't want textbook definitions. So let's look at the mechanics. What is actually happening in the environment that separates a trial-based procedure from a free-operant one?
Well, it fundamentally comes down to the constraints placed on the opportunity to respond. A trial-based procedure, which, we often refer to clinically as discrete trial training, or DTT, it provides exactly one opportunity to produce a response.
Just one.
Exactly one. The structure is entirely controlled by the instructor. It follows a very, very rigid temporal sequence. First, you have the presentation of a clear discriminative stimulus, the SD, then a prompt if it's needed.
Right.
This is followed by the learner's response. Then, a specific consequence is delivered by the instructor, so either reinforcement or an error correction. And finally, there's the intertrial interval, which is that brief pause before the next SD is presented.
I really want to highlight that intertrial interval because clinically, that is the defining boundary.
Yeah, it marks the end.
It marks the definitive end of that single learning opportunity. Once that consequence is delivered and you enter that pause, the trial is dead. The learner cannot, emit that targeted behavior again and access reinforcement until you decide to present the next SD.
Right. You are completely capping their response rate based on your own speed. The environment is closed. You basically hold the keys to every single repetition.
Yeah.
Now look at a free-operant procedure. The literature often describes free-operant behavior as requiring, quote, minimal displacement of the organism in space and time.
Which is such a textbook way to say it.
It really is. To put that in plain English, it's highly efficient, low-friction behavior where the learner doesn't have to, move heaven and earth or wait for you to reset the environment to do it again.
Right.
It has a discrete beginning and end, and importantly, it can be emitted at almost any time. The central differentiator here is unrestricted access. It allows for continuous responses and reinforcements without, waiting for a new instruction from a teacher.
Here's an analogy from our sources to make this stick, because I love this one. Trial-based teaching is like a batter in baseball.
Oh, yeah, the baseball analogy.
You are standing at home plate, but you can only swing when the pitcher throws the ball. You are entirely dependent on that external cue. If the pitcher holds onto the ball for 10 minutes, you stand there for 10 minutes.
Exactly.
But a free-operant arrangement is like shooting hoops alone on a basketball court. You have the ball, you have the hoop, and you can take as many shots as you want, as fast as you want, without waiting for anyone to tell you to shoot.
Right, because in the baseball scenario, the pitch is the SD. It's a discrete event that sets the occasion for a single swing. In the basketball scenario, your own motivation and, the presence of the hoop that drives the continuous chain of behavior. The environment itself, rather than a specific instructor prompt, sets the occasion for the behavior to occur repeatedly.
Okay, but let me push back on this for a second, because this trips up a lot of clinicians when they are designing verbal behavior programs.
Yeah, the verbal stuff always gets tricky.
Right. If we are talking about free operants being continuous and not requiring an instructor cue, isn't manding considered a free operant? How does that fit? It's communication, it often involves another person, and it's a verbal operant, not a repetitive motor task like shooting hoops. Doesn't a learner have to wait for someone to be present to mand?
That pushback gets right to the heart of the underlying behavioral mechanisms. Yes, manding is absolutely a free-operant behavior.
Okay.
It fits the definition perfectly because we have to look at what is controlling the onset of the behavior. A man follows the learner's internal motivating operation, the MO, rather than a clear, instructor-delivered signaling antecedent.
Ah, right, the motivation.
Right, so if a learner is thirsty, that internal state of deprivation acts as the MO. They don't have to wait for you to ask, what do you want?
Mm.
Or present a picture of water. The motivation drives the response, making it free to occur at any time that specific motivation is present.
So the restriction isn't about whether the behavior is physical, like shooting a basketball, or verbal, like asking for water.
No, not at all.
It's entirely about what is controlling the onset. If the learner controls the onset based on their own internal motivation or the natural environment, it's a free operant. If the instructor controls the onset by delivering an SD, it's trial-based.
Exactly.
Let's connect this directly to real-world applied ABA. The source material provides a great scenario illustrating the transition between these two procedures in a clinic or school setting.
Yeah, let's examine a reading program. Imagine a practitioner tasked with teaching a learner to read words aloud from a specific list.
Okay.
In the initial trial-based phase, the practitioner presents flashcards one at a time. The practitioner holds up a card and says, "What word?" That is the clear SD. The learner reads the word. That is the response.
Right. And
Then the practitioner delivers reinforcement, drops the card, and pauses. In this phase, the learner can only read the word when the card is explicitly presented to them. They are, the baseball batter waiting for the pitch.
And while that structure is incredibly effective for initial acquisition meaning, making sure the learner actually has the phonetic skills to decode the word, it does absolutely nothing to build fluency.
Nothing at all.
The cognitive load is broken up by the instructor's pacing. So, to build that fluency, the practitioner transitions to a free operant phase. Now, instead of holding up single cards, the practitioner hands the learner a single sheet of paper with a 500-word list on it.
Right.
The practitioner says go, starts a timer for 5 minutes, and then just tracks the total number of correct responses the learner emits.
And notice the difference there. The learner now dictates the pace. They don't have to wait for the next card to be flipped or for the instructor to reset the stimulus field. They can emit as many reading responses as physically possible within that 5-minute window.
Yeah.
This transition is vital because it moves the learner from mere accuracy like, can they read the word, to actual behavioral fluency, which is accuracy plus speed.
And this transition from the flashcard to the 500-word sheet brings us right into the most dangerous territory for practitioners. This is where we see major clinical mistakes and, honestly, the exact logic traps that Pearson VUE uses on the exam.
Oh, absolutely.
If you stay in that flashcard phase too long, or if you evaluate it incorrectly, the whole program falls apart. Let's look at the measurement mismatch, which is our first big trap. We see practitioners trying to use rate to track data during discrete trials.
This is a massive clinical trap. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
Rate is mathematically and conceptually invalid for discrete trial training.
Let's think about the actual math of rate. We're talking about frequency over a specific time period. If you're running discrete trials, who is actually controlling the frequency?
It's the instructor.
Right. It's not the learner. If I am holding the flashcards and I decide to only show you 10 cards in a 1-hour session, I've artificially capped your frequency at 10. So if we calculate a rate of 10 words per hour, whose behavior are we actually measuring?
You're measuring yourself.
Exactly. We are measuring my rate of presenting cards, not the learner's capability of reading them.
Which means the data is completely useless for evaluating the learner's progress. For trial-based procedures, where the opportunities are restricted by the environment you created, you must use percent of occurrence or trials to criterion.
Yeah, you have to.
Because percent of occurrence tells you how many times the behavior happened out of the specific limited opportunities you provided. Trials to criterion tells you how many guided opportunities it took to reach mastery. You reserve rate strictly for free operant behaviors, where the learner controls the denominator and can respond continuously.
And that measurement mismatch naturally leads to the next big issue, our second trap. If we're tracking the wrong data, or if we are satisfied with percent of occurrence without ever pushing for rate, we end up keeping the learner trapped under our stimulus control for way too long.
Yeah, that over-reliance on discrete trials is a clinical error that plagues so many programs.
Right, because discrete trial training is incredibly powerful for establishing a new skill because it isolates the target and minimizes distractions. But if you fail to intentionally move that skill to a free operant arrangement, you are actively preventing your learner from making generalized connections in the real world.
Right. If a child only ever identifies a cup when you place it on a blank table, eliminate all other stimuli and ask, "What is this?" They may never independently point out a cup in a crowded kitchen sink when they're thirsty.
Exactly.
You have to systematically fade your artificial SDs and transfer that control to the natural environment.
Which brings up a very important distinction that requires some serious conceptual clarity. Our third trap. When we talk about transferring control to the natural environment, a lot of clinicians confuse free-operant arrangements with naturalistic or incidental teaching. People hear the word free and they immediately picture like an unstructured playroom where the kid leads the session.
Oh, that's a huge misconception. Naturalistic or incidental teaching uses the natural environment and current motivating operations to facilitate teaching. For example, you might place a highly preferred toy on a high shelf. The child wants it. There's your natural MO. You wait for them to initiate, and then you might prompt a man or wait for an independent man. That is naturalistic teaching.
You are capturing a moment.
Yes, but a true free-operant arrangement specifically means the learner has unrestricted, continuous opportunities to respond repeatedly without waiting for the environment to reset.
So to synthesize that, incidental teaching is about using natural motivation to capture a learning opportunity in the wild. But a free-operant procedure is about removing the ceiling on how many times a behavior can occur. Handing a kid a massive math worksheet and saying go isn't naturalistic teaching at all. It's highly contrived, but it is a free-operant arrangement because they can answer 50 questions back to back without you prompting each individual math problem.
Exactly. The focus in evaluating a free-operant procedure is the total lack of restriction on the response rate, regardless of whether the setting is natural or contrived.
So if we were looking at this through the lens of Pearson v. UE logic, because you need a rigid framework when you sit for the exam, the test makers are looking for those specific discriminators. How do we pull the right answer out of a dense scenario for task list item G.13?
You look for the boundaries of the behavior. That's exam trigger 1. When you read a scenario where an instructor presents an SD, waits for a single response, provides consequence, and then explicitly takes the materials away or pauses before starting again, you are looking at trial-based, or DTT. The key identifier in the text will be the reset between each single opportunity.
And when the question asks for the best measurement system for a behavior that is clearly restricted by those limited opportunities, like answering questions on a 10-item test or responding to greetings from peers, you choose percent of occurrence or trials to criterion. That's trigger 2. You never choose rate when the opportunities are capped by someone else.
Never. On the other side, exam trigger 3. When you see a scenario describing a learner emitting a response freely without specific trial-by-trial prompts, for example, a child riding a bike repeatedly during recess, or a student completing that sheet of math problems independently at their desk, you choose free-operant. The hallmark phrase or concept to look for is continuous operation without requiring a new SD for every single action.
And finally, trigger 4. When the question asks for the best measurement system for that free-operant behavior, like tracking how many words a client types in 5 minutes or how many times a student taps their pencil during a lecture, you choose rate. Free-operant equals rate. That is a non-negotiable connection in behavioral measurement.
That framework will absolutely get you through the exam questions. But let's elevate this from simply passing a test to elite clinical application. Why does mastering the design of these two procedures fundamentally change the trajectory of a learner's programming?
It all comes down to building true fluency. We touched on this with the reading example, but it's the core philosophy behind G.13.
It is. Trial-based procedures are the scaffolding. They build the initial repertoire. When a skill is completely absent, DTT is often the most efficient way to establish it because it reduces the noise of the environment.
Right.
But true behavioral fluency is a combination of accuracy and speed. DTT can give you accuracy, but because the pace is controlled by the instructor's delivery of the SD, it cannot give you speed. True fluency and true automaticity can only be achieved and can only be measured through free-operant procedures.
Here is the so what for your clinical practice. If you only ever test and teach a learner using discrete trials, you are artificially capping their independence. You are creating a ceiling that they cannot break through because you are holding the keys to every single response.
It's just keeping them reliant on you.
Exactly. You must design programs that intentionally, systematically fade the instructor's control. You have to build programs that eventually allow the learner to operate freely in their environment. We build skills to set them free, not to keep them sitting at the table waiting for our instruction.
Because assessing a learner's capability isn't just about what they can do when prompted. It is about what they can sustain independently when the prompts are gone.
If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. At www.amethysttherapyservices.com or at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Think about your own day today. Almost every single behavior you emit in your adult life, from making your morning coffee to driving your car to typing an email, is a free operant. You do not wait for an instructor to tell you to take the next step. So why do we spend 90% of our clinical hours forcing our learners to wait for our SDs? If the ultimate goal of applied behavior analysis is truly independence, ask yourself, how fast are you getting your learners off of your cues and into the free operant world?